Well, first of all, thank you all for tuning into this webinar. Now, get in, losers, we're detecting threats. And I'm really hoping that we have a few Mean Girl fans out there who understood that reference. Rachel and I are going to be talking about how to identify Gootloader, Qbot, and Sackoolish, which are just a few threats from the 2023 Threat Detection Report. My name is Mac. I'm a detection engineer, and when I'm not detecting threats, you're guaranteed to find me seeking out the best place for donuts and ice cream or running marathons.
And I'm Rachel Schwach. I am a detection engineer, and you can find me at a local burger joint, reading and playing with some Legos.
Please enjoy this meme along with the others that we've snuck in for your enjoyment. And don't forget to download Red Canary's Threat Detection Report, where you can find all the information that we're going to give you here, as well as details regarding other threats in our 2023 report. So as previously mentioned, the first threat that we're going to be discussing is Gootloader. So Gootloader is a type of malware, and on this threat staging profile, its hobbies include delivering payloads, transmitting victim data, and persisting covertly. We do want to mention that Gootloader and Gootkit, they're the same, but different. So these are separated by declaring one, the initial delivery and loader versus the payload, which is Gootkit. And with Gootloader, we do see fellow activity like Qbot Strike or Gootkit. Moving on to the initial access. So Gootloader bad actors compromise WordPress blogs and utilize the SEO, which is the search engine optimization techniques. This means basically that they've riddled their compromised site with keywords, and anyone who's searching those keywords are going to be directed to the site. The goal is to lure the user to download the malicious zip file from the site, which contains the initial Gootloader script. The naming convention of the zip is usually the user search query terms joined by dashes. So the majority of the Gootloader campaigns that we've observed contain the word agreement in the file name. You can see the example on screen, and I bet you can guess that if a user searched for banking organization agreement, well, the downloaded zip would be named banking_organization_agreement.zip. Moving on to the execution, there are more than one method of execution when it comes to Gootloader. For the first method of Gootloader execution, a JScript file is extracted from the downloaded malicious zip and executed via WScript. Another fun fact is that Gootloader targets victims utilizing AD. We know this just based on the fact that it does a simple check to see if the host is a part of AD by querying the value of user DNS domain environment variable. And previously, we've seen Gootloader using JavaScript files as a common entry point, but now we see Gootloader code being spliced together with another JavaScript library with the naming convention _.js. So library code is combined together into the malicious agreement files that I mentioned previously, and then those are executed on the victim systems. Now to touch on another method of execution, more recently, we've seen Gootloader writing a randomly named JavaScript file, initially with the extension .log, to the app data roaming folder. Then WScript executes the initial JavaScript dropper, unpacks a second .js file, and creates a scheduled task. Which, speaking of scheduled task, that's going to be persistent. So the scheduled task that is a persistence mechanism intended to run these commands again the next time that the user logs in. So once the chain was initiated by cscript where that scheduled task picks up, it executes a second .js file along with an instance of PowerShell without any command line. The first PowerShell command retrieves the .NET DLL from the Windows registry, reflectively loads it. And in that .NET DLL code is implemented to pull an obfuscated payload such as Qbot Strike from a Windows registry key, removes the obfuscation, and then executes its contents. So back to that second PowerShell instance, an encoded command is going to be passed in there. And this instance is used to communicate back to the compromised WordPress site, pull down additional content, and then execute it. We're going to try to give you guys some detection opportunities because in order to protect your environment, you want to detect on this early on. The detection opportunity on the right is detecting when a user has already opened that Gootloader zip file and then double click to execute the JS script. We're looking to detect the Windows script host, so WScript, executing a JScript file from the user's app data folder. Then the detection opportunity on the left is detecting the chain of process execution. So that's WScript spawning cscript and then cscript spawning PowerShell.
And so I'm going to talk about some other detection opportunities that we have. Like Mac mentioned, PowerShell performs a reflective load of a .NET assembly. So if you look for PowerShell executing with a command line that has that reflection.assembly and load and then byte with brackets, That's a good way to detect that. It may be encoded, so you'll probably have to do like, some cyber chefing to try to catch that in an encoded manner as well. And then run DLL32, that's a common injection process for Qbot Strike, which is a lot of times the follow-on payload. So to catch that, we can look for run DLL32 executing with an empty command line. And it should always have a command line legitimately. So that's a good indicator of process injection is when those LOLBins that execute that should have command lines execute without one. And then if it has a network connection or a child process, even more so indicative of process injection. And now let's move on to talking about Qbot. Qbot's a fun one. It's been around since at least 2007. It initially really just focused on stealing user data and baking credentials, but now Qbot's functionality has expanded. It incorporates features such as follow-on payload delivery, very common. It also can deliver C2 frameworks such as Qbot Strike. Go back here. It was the #1 most detected threat in Red Canary environments in 2022 as well. So even though it's old, it's not going away. It retools, it comes back. Now I'll talk about initial access of it. So it uses an email-based distribution model, but it is constantly modifying the delivery techniques, changing what type of attachment, or if it just gives a URL to go download a file instead of putting the attachment in the email. Some of the examples that we've seen here were like zip file attachments that expand to an ISO to then deliver the Qbot payload. We've seen OneNote delivery observed in early 2023. The HTML attachments to download a password protected zip containing an ISO, that was later in 22. Lately, well, I'd say lately, about when Qbot was last active in about May, we were seeing a lot of zip files that expanded to WSF Windows script file payloads. And another thing to note about Qbot is it cycles. So it has periods of very intense activity followed by quiet near dormancy of this malware. And it usually, when they retool, it comes with a change of their delivery methods. Sometimes they'll change up how they use certain execution methods, but we have some ways that we can just detect it no matter what they try to do. Qbot is also interesting in the fact that they really tried to embrace distribution via affiliates to get a greater spread of the malware, because it's a very opportunistic threat. It doesn't try to target one specific industry. It's just anybody and everybody that it can. So it has these two affiliates known as TA570 and TA577. TA570 is informally known as presidents because they reference Democratic presidents in their malware configuration. So one example of that's Obama 225. I don't know why it's just Democratic presidents. Probably won't ever know, but that's just the way it is with them. And then letters, they reference letters in their malware configuration, usually just a set of two, so like BB or AA. And it's really difficult to distinguish between these two affiliates. The only thing is, like, sometimes they may use different delivery methods. So like if Presidents is using delivery through a PDF, maybe Letters is using OneNote at the same time. But that isn't always the case. Sometimes they do use the same delivery methods. So another way to try to differentiate between these two is in their PowerShell that they execute. Sometimes it'll be coded to go to an IP address over HTTP, and that's going to be where like Presidents usually goes. And then for TA577 or Letters, they usually have an actual network connection to a domain listed over HTTPS. Now, that's not always the case, but most consistently, that's how we're able to differentiate the two. So we'll go through an example of execution, and like I mentioned, it changes quite a bit, except for when the Qbot payload actually drops, and that's where consistency will be. But for example, we've got WScript that then executes a malicious extracted file, such as a WSF file. And that file will then spawn the base64 encoded PowerShell command. And that is when it'll reach out to the domain or IP address to grab that DLL. And then run DLL32 or reg server 32 will execute that malicious DLL. And that is when Qbot starts. That's where a lot of the consistency of what Qbot looks like starts. And then process injection will occur. There's a lot of targets too that Qbot has for process injection, all like signed Microsoft binaries, that can be found on whatever system. And then those binaries will execute reconnaissance, such as who am I, or IP config/all. And yeah, so Qbot, like I said, most detected threat in 2022. It was also real heavy in early 2023 up through like that May timeframe. And after May until now, it's been pretty quiet, but it's been long enough where cycle could happen any day now, and then it's just everywhere again. So keeps us busy for sure because of how much of a widespread opportunistic threat that Qbot is. And so a persistence mechanism that we'll see with Qbot is a scheduled task being made. A scheduled task will execute something like reg server 32, and even weirder than making a scheduled task to execute reg server 32 is making one to execute a DLL within app data local temp. So really strange, why would you need a scheduled task to execute reg server 32 or run DLL 32? But even more so, you can watch those folders for strange activity. And the task name is also weird, right? It's a randomly generated mess of letters. So process injection of it, like I mentioned, lots of different Microsoft binaries that it'll target. And it actually will determine injection a lot of times based on the software on the endpoint, such as the antivirus software and the architecture. So if it's a 32-bit or 64-bit system. But not all of these targets have known circumstances. That utilman.exe, we only recently saw that back in like March as an injection target, and it hasn't been pinpointed exactly what the circumstances to get that one injected into. But some of them, like iExplore, that one's been known to just be like, if it is Avast or AVG or Windows Defender with a 32-bit system, that it'll inject into that. And all of these binaries, they'll spawn the reconnaissance commands such as who am I, ARP, NetView. And that's also, you can think of these commands probably shouldn't be coming from processes that aren't shell processes. So Explorer spawning recon's probably pretty weird. So that's also something to keep an eye out for. And some detection opportunities. So we've got run DLL32, very commonly used. It was used in the last Gootloader mention as well. And so you can look for run DLL32 executing, but not executing a .dll. Qbot will frequently rename their DLL files to something. It could be just a random string or a .dat file. We've seen that. So anytime that it's executing, look for that containing a .dll, and there is some tuning that will be necessary for it though. I know like .cpl files are pretty common to be ran legitimately. So you'll just have to test it in your environment and see if it just does not contain DLL is enough, or if you'll have to add one or two exclusions. And also if run DLL executes and the command line has program data and a DLL executing from the root of that, or just a file in the root of that, because it's not always going to be a .dll. That's another good one to look for. I've seen the public folder used in recent Qbot examples as well, so that's another one to look for. And then we've got PowerShell. And so PowerShell will usually have that shortened encoded command parameter. So if you look for, instead of TAC encoded command, that TAC ENC, TAC EC, and TAC EN will be good indicators, because it's another way to try to evade detection.
Again, just going over more detection opportunities. Similar to Gootloader, a scheduled task is used as a persistence mechanism. So on the right, we offer a detection opportunity for this persistence. We detect on the process scheduled task with the command line, including /create, as well as detecting the presence of either reg server 32 or run DLL 32. And as Rachel mentioned, Qbot attempts to evade defenses, which that kind of leaves us with a process injection detection opportunity. So to detect on this, we're looking for process execution without a command line, looking for that to make an external netcon. And then off of this, we are looking for the spawning of multiple recon commands, which are commands such as who am I, scanning, enumeration. She showed a whole list on a previous slide. They're commands that collect data about the target system. So moving on to the final threat that we're going to talk about today, which is Sackoolish. It's another malware that uses masquerading drive-by downloads. It's one of the top most prevalent threats of last year. Sackoolish is linked to Evil Corp, which is a suspected Russian cybercrime group. And not only has Sackoolish been seen delivered by instances of Raspberry Robin, but it also has been observed dropping additional malware as well. So that's like net support, blister, etc. Looking at that initial access, by compromising a website such as WordPress, Sackoolish then is able to gain initial access by leading unsuspecting users to download a malicious file. It relies heavily on social engineering, so Sackoolish needs to trick the user into running the malicious JavaScript payload. And at one point, the payload was within a zip file disguised as a browser update, and we still do see that quite a bit. But in 2022, we saw changes to the zip file names. So they're incorporating lookalike characters to replace certain characters in file names. So for example, instead of your typical file name chrome.update.zip, Sackoolish would then replace the letter C with their UTF-8 acrylic lookalike character C. Just another way to maybe, evade detection, etc. Once the malicious JavaScript file is downloaded and then the user double clicks it, WScript executes that JS file, and then a command prompt starts reconnaissance. So again, you're going to see who am I, enumeration of domains, enterprise, local admin, etc. And then after the reconnaissance activities, Sackoolish redirects that output of the executed commands to .temp files so they can exfiltrate that. In the execution chain, we've also seen a secondary payload, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. Here we go. The secondary payload could be blister, like we previously mentioned, Qbot strike, net support rat. About half the time that payload was net support, and the other half the time it was blister with an embedded Qbot strike payload. So net support is a remote access tool, that's what that rat stands for, that can be leveraged maliciously to use Windows registry run key persistence. And then blister is pretty new. It's a loader that's been seen containing Qbot strike beacons or other remote access tools as well. It's really unusual for a browser to download a JavaScript file and use Windows script host to execute it. And it's even more suspicious to see that script communicating externally. So the first detection opportunity that we have is detect on that browser spawning WScript with an external network connection. And then next, we know that Sackoolish executes reconnaissance commands, so we're going to look for that as well. That's a common theme you'll see with our detection opportunities. We're looking for enumerating domain trust relationships with NL test. And of course, we do know that if undetected, Sackoolish is looking to do a discover of domains and then potentially turn into ransomware at that point. I'll hand it over to Rachel to talk about some other detection opportunities.
Yeah, so more about SocGholish detection. So it also is a malware that likes to use run DLL32, whether it's SocGholish itself and the Qbot strike payload that follows. Again, it likes to use the program data folder. Keep an eye out for that one, executing with run DLL32 in the command line. Also, a good one is run DLL32 with executing with the function DLL register server. So DLL register server, it is a legitimate option, but when used legitimately, you should probably only see it with register server 32. So that binary is actually responsible for like registering of the DLLs. And run DLL32 is more supposed to only be responsible for executing the functions and DLLs. So when you see run DLL32 using the command line function DLL register server, it's a good detection opportunity. A lot of malware families like to do that. So you won't be just catching SocGholish with that. And then specifically for SocGholish is the command prompt executing with that who am I /all with the output redirect arrows. It'll also do the other reconnaissance commands in a similar fashion, so you could detect on that. And outputs it to a .tmp temp file and usually like the app data local temp folder. So other things that you can add to that command line if you need to. Yeah, what gives people feelings of power? Threat detection above all else, right? Because it's a great day for us when we catch these things and it's exciting and it's like, hey, I got you. You're not getting past me. But anyway, I mean, I know some people probably prefer money, but threat detection is pretty good. All right, so some key takeaways. LOLBins are highly abused, guys. Every single one of these threats, like I don't know how many times I've said run DLL32 in the past 20 minutes, but it's used a lot. So if you keep an eye out on, you know, legitimate binaries acting strangely, using, you know, command line parameters that maybe they shouldn't, or just, you know, trying to do weird network connections, look for these binaries making network connections that aren't like Microsoft or common external network connections. Look for persistence. So scheduled tasks, we mentioned a bunch. If you don't clean up that persistence, you didn't really clean up the infection. It'll just restart. And then also go check out the Red Canary threat detection report, because you'll have all of these threats mentioned in there, but there's also quite a few more with more detection opportunities, more expansion into these LOLBins and how you can look for when they're acting strange. So now we'll start the Q&A. I know there are some questions in here. Yeah.
Yes.
Let's see.
I guess we can start off with, someone asked, with the scripts, do you have to be local admin to run these? So if you don't have local admin access, can that reduce your risk? And obviously, removing unnecessary local admin access reduces your risk for pretty much a lot of things, but we also recommend that you prevent automatic execution of JScript files for things such as Gootloader. You can do this by changing the default file associations for .js and .jsc files as well. That'll help mitigate a little bit of the risk for Gootloader, that is.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, you don't have to be a local admin. So like a lot of these scheduled tasks too that we mentioned, they will set the task to run under system. So I mean, of course, don't just give anyone local admin access. That will prevent a lot of things, a lot of downloads and a lot of EXEs from being run. So it does absolutely help, but a lot of this stuff, it doesn't always need it. And I mean, it also comes down to your policies, right? So if you have to be a local admin to run PowerShell, that helps quite a bit. So that would stop some things. It just, you can configure these things on a user shouldn't be running WScript or CScript, then don't allow it. Only allow it on a user basis that needs it.
Yeah.
So that's the best way to prevent that.
And I think it's also sometimes overlooked that Qbot also, just for an example, will steal Windows credentials by dumping the memory of LSAS. So you're going to get some traction there as well.
Yeah. See, so we've also got, what are some additional ways to detect or monitor for potential persistence? So we mentioned the scheduled task, obviously, and we also hit on a little bit with the net support rat. That one uses the registry run keys, and so do a ton of other threats. So the registry run keys, that's good to monitor. So it's like the run and the run once. There's a lot of other registry keys that are startup related. Once the user logs in, it'll execute. And then there is the startup folder in Windows that every user has. So that's a good one to monitor if you see like file mod changes in the startup folder from like PowerShell, our W script, our MSHTA. That's weird activity. Those processes probably shouldn't always be interacting with your startup folder. So that's something to look for.
And it looks like another question we had is, since Run DLL is a crucial part of Microsoft, do you have any recommendations on narrowing the detection to filter out the noise?
Yeah. So a good resource to like kind of learn about Run DLL32 a little bit more is Echo Trail. Yeah. Echo Trail has a lot of good stuff. LOLBins project has a lot of great stuff. So if you look up LOLBins and look up Run DLL32, they give you examples of Run DLL32 specifically being abused. They have that detection logic out there, and that's just open source. So like anytime, you know, a detection engineer or a threat hunter saw something, they can add to that. And so there's a really good list of, you know, strange parent processes from Run DLL32 or strange child processes from Run DLL32. And it will take some time in your environment to just run a couple detection opportunities, tune it out, a couple things, you know, like the executing without a .dll, that will take a little bit of tuning, but that is a great detection opportunity right there, because when it's executing those strange .dat files, or if it's executing this really long string of random letters, that's something that worms like to do a lot. It'll just look like gibberish, but it's executing strange Run DLL32 stuff. So good sources there to just kind of learn more about the binary and make it fit to your environment.
We were also asked, what's the best way to eliminate false positives with LSAS access? There are a lot of processes that like to read it, and we always advocate for continuous tuning. So if we have noticed that some password protection and antivirus products, they're going to scan LSAS to elevate users' passwords. So if you find something that's approved by your help desk or IT support, they should be added to like an allow list. But you know, that a lot of that comes with like knowing your environment, knowing what's normal and what's not normal.
Yeah, let's see, what else is it we got? Future episodes planned, perhaps live demos for threat hunting deep dive. There are definitely some more webinars planned. Mac and I don't have one at the moment. There are always webinars going on, and you can also check our blogs out, and a lot of times there will be like deeper dives in there. Yeah. And where can I see or find the threats Canary has recently detected? So check out our blog. We're constantly updating.
We also have
intel insights.
Yep.
Yeah.
Each month.
Yeah, and those are great. Yeah, it'll show like month by month, what have we seen, the trends, you know, loader and 5 right now or not. So those are all good to check. Ooh, yes, absolutely. With using atomic to identify and red feedbacks. Yes. I definitely should have mentioned that as a great resource too. So, you know, get your detections in place and then go and run those, and then you know, ensure that you're actually detecting when it is behaving strangely. Yeah, absolutely. Art will have really good ideas on there for, you know, if it is saying execute this to detect malicious use, then that's something else you can narrow down in for detection. let's see. How else could you differentiate between normal and malicious usage of net support besides for checking for a test license? So in malicious use cases, I think, Mac, didn't you have a slide on that one that had, they specifically use a registry key to create persistence, where not a lot of legitimate uses will use a registry key for persistence.
Here we go.
There you go.
There we go.
But also, you know, if you're not using net support in your environment, you can try to detect that like based on process name, based on publisher, if you have that capability.
Obviously based on surrounding activity.
Yeah, what directory, you know, if somebody is executing net support out of a download directory, maybe they're getting in some trouble and you might want to see what they're up to. So net support isn't one that you want to just not detect on, because it is used by a lot of different malware families too. Ooh, what do you do with all your spare time during Qbot's summer break?
I wish we had
catch all the different malware that's coming up, I guess. Man, it feels like it's been busy with like Chrome loader stuff lately, so that's been taking up quite a bit of time. And then there's been a lot of other remote access Trojans, Rimcos, and KSAR rats been keeping us pretty busy. So not really a break, but it's a little bit less busy when Qbot's on a break, so I'll take what I can get. Let's see. How fast are you seeing initial infection to follow-on activity? It varies, I would say. Sometimes it's really fast, but a lot of times we'll catch it so quickly, you know, and the host will isolate, so we don't see that follow-on activity. We don't know exactly the time period that it would be, but there are times where it's like, it's quick. It can be within 20, 30 minutes. Mac, you take some.
You're answering them so fast.
Sorry.
This says, a little off topic of these malware families, any suggestions on how to monitor or detect activities executed from Python scripts as opposed to command line attributes? We do look at like script loads and what scripts contain, and you can monitor those as well if you have the means to, or if you're utilizing Red Canary, we will do that. So you can look at, you know, what's within those scripts, as well as, again, a lot of this stuff, it'll spawn other things, and we're looking at that follow-up activity as well as what's leading to that as well.
Parent process is a good one.
Yep.
You know, if you've got words spawning Python, it's not necessarily good. Yeah. I saw recently that Microsoft's about to allow Python in Excel files, so yeah, something to look for.
TLS. Okay, another question we got was, does Red Canary have detectors for coverage? I believe that might be coverage communication, communication channels such as DNS over TLS. A lot of stuff that we're doing right now, it does look at whether or not there is external netcons and, again, what's happening around processes and stuff, but most of it is heavily influenced by endpoint activity as well. So there is a little bit of a dive into some of that network stuff, but again, most of it's like, does it have an external netcon? What is that external netcon? And so we are aware in taking note of what it is and whether or not it's malicious, what the reputation of it is it a new domain? But we're still kind of new into the world of network with correlation.
Favorite threat to analyze? Ooh.
That's hard. Anything
that is.
I just like when it gets juicy and I can follow a giant train down and
Yes,
honestly.
anything that does use run DLL 32, I
Mhm.
get so excited when I get an event and I immediately know I'm like, yeah, this is gonna
Yeah.
be a good one.
I do like Sackoolish because as soon as I see that underscore or browser update or the underscore.js, I'm like, okay, we have a train here to follow.
True. Yeah. Or I don't know. Some of these random like Chrome loader ones are fun because you'll see really interesting file names of whatever somebody was trying to download, like some crazy wallpaper, like I don't know, Spider-Man wallpaper.exe, and I'm like, I don't know, I'm just laughing at you, but
Yeah. The best is when you know someone's kid may have taken their computer for some games and what they downloaded was not in fact Farmville.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to adversary usage of Python and Excel. I think that it probably won't be something real adversaries leverage as much as red teams are, people just running like, internal pen test type situation. It could be, but it's just the fact that usually these trends aren't usually like taken as quickly by adversaries from what we've seen. They're usually like, you know, red
Mhm.
teams are just they're interested. They like these new things, and your adversary is going to kind of trust reliable more. I feel like,
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
yeah,
Like Qbot, if they can just change it a tiny bit and Qbot can continue living on for the rest of eternity, then they'd
yeah,
rather use something like that they know is going to evade detection rather than trying out something new where people kind of had their hands in it and are actively playing with it.
yeah,
But I mean, it's the same thing as like when macros are enabled. I also think people are kind of aware. I mean, obviously, it still happens a lot. Actually, people clicking things in their inboxes that they're getting emails from. So I guess it's just going to be another thing with Excel documents coming through.
yeah. When will Red Canary host a boot camp? Bro, I would love to do a boot camp. So I don't know.
We are doing breaches and backdoors, which I know is not exactly a boot camp, but it's still a pretty fun exercise that you can take part in.
Yeah, it's a good idea though. I think Mac and I would definitely be interested in running a boot camp.
Oh yeah, that would be fun. I would love that.
See, have you seen any more?
Coming in.
Have you seen or have you found recent SocGholish injects a bit more difficult to resolve to the stage 2 site payload?
I mean, obviously, if it gets to that point and it hasn't been detective, like I said, you're going to want to detect on that a lot quicker. And so it is going to be a little bit more of a heavier cleanup. However, a lot of it's going to follow the same protocol where you're wiping a machine, you're going and making sure that anything that was saved to disk, any scheduled tasks that were created for persistence are cleaned up, et cetera, et cetera. But obviously, as a threat or as a bad actor makes its way through your system and actually gets on and starts, initiating and executing additional payload, it does get harder to clean up. And what has been found or dumped can obviously be a lot more detrimental to your business.
Are you seeing any attackers leveraging technologies relating to serverless, such as Lambda, Docker, etc.? So we have seen like trying to, um, what was the word I'm looking for? Trying to escape containerization, um, trying to escalate privileges and escape that container to run on a system. Um, that's as far as like Docker related. I mean, we've got a ton of, you know,
I guess Docker, like,
cloud.
yeah, we've, looked into like Docker being used to spawn shell commands in like a privileged container, things like of that sorts.
Yeah, and I mean, we're also really gearing up to detect all these cloud threats that are coming up. And so in that manner, we're also constantly looking for, privilege escalation techniques in that regard and potential credential theft.
Yeah. Or another instance is maybe like a relocated instance of Docker, things of that sort, where
Yeah.
then adversaries are going to download local instances of Docker. They're going to perform malicious acts like creating privileged containers to spawn those malicious commands.
All right. On the SocGholish one, in regards to the other question,
Trying to get the IOCs.
Sites prior to take update JavaScript downloaded.
When you say IOCs, are you referring to, I guess you can answer this in the question box or the attendee box, but I'm wondering if you are pertaining to like those WordPress sites that are potentially being compromised. And if so, it's kind of like whack-a-mole at that point, because it's pretty easy for someone to stand a new one up or compromise a different website.
They'll usually have like 10 compromised websites too, like at the same time that's listed in the SocGholish configuration. It's like, it really is whack-a-mole because it's just, they have a ton of them that are compromised, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, which is not probably, it's why we recommend detecting on other things rather than just those IOCs, more of like behavioral detectors.
Right.
Yes, this recording is going to be posted.
Oh yeah, always trying to get up to the longer lived sites that actually serve the download. Yeah. And that's really also makes it hard to IOC these websites too, because it has like a really, a history of being a legitimate site and then it got compromised. So it's usually why a lot of times we don't focus on that aspect. You really you'll hit the nail on the head more times than not if you just focus on that behavior. And you can IOC. What's even better is IOCing that file that gets downloaded. So if that gets seen in your environment and you have it banned and another person downloads it, then it'll get blocked before execution.
Mm-hmm. In case they're targeting your entire company or organization. All right. Well, it looks like the questions have slowed down. So thank you again, everyone, for joining in and interacting with us. It's been a pleasure. And we hope to see you all next time.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.